In the basement of the Iowa State Historical Society, buried beneath decades of forgotten municipal records and faded correspondence, lies a collection of documents that challenges everything we understand about the natural order of human development. These papers, discovered during a routine archive reorganization in 1987, tell the story of 7 children from the farming community of Millbrook Creek, Iowa, who, according to multiple independent sources, ceased to age after participating in an autumn ritual known locally as the Harvest Circle in October of 1887. The photographs are perhaps the most disturbing evidence. Taken over a span of nearly 2 decades, they show the same 7 children with identical faces, identical heights, and identical clothing, standing in various locations around Millbrook Creek. The earliest photograph, dated 1888, shows them posed outside the town's one-room schoolhouse. The latest, bearing the inscription Summer of 1906 in faded ink, captures the same group standing near what appears to be the same schoolhouse, now weathered by nearly 20 years of Iowa seasons. The children appear unchanged in every measurable way. These photographs were found alongside testimonies from 17 different townspeople, 3 visiting physicians, 2 traveling ministers, and a federal census worker who documented what he called the most peculiar administrative challenge of his 30-year career. Their accounts, when examined together, paint a picture of a phenomenon that defied explanation then and continues to resist rational interpretation today. Millbrook Creek was established in 1871 by German and Irish immigrants seeking fertile farmland in central Iowa. By 1887, the community had grown to approximately 300 residents, supported by corn and wheat farming, with a small but thriving dairy operation. The town centered around a single main road that connected to the county seat of Fairview, some 20 miles east. Like many rural communities of the era, Millbrook Creek was largely self-sufficient, with its own blacksmith general store, schoolhouse, and Lutheran church. The isolation that made Millbrook Creek attractive to settlers also fostered an environment where old-world superstitions could take root alongside Christian doctrine. Many of the German families had brought with them harvest traditions dating back centuries, rituals designed to ensure successful crops and ward off the harsh Iowa winters. Most of these were harmless celebrations involving communal meals, folk songs, and ceremonial offerings of the first fruits of the harvest. The Harvest Circle, however, was different. According to surviving testimonies, it was a secretive gathering held annually on the night of the harvest moon, typically in mid to late October. Participation was limited to children between the ages of 7 and 12, selected by a process that remains unclear from the historical record. The ritual took place in a natural depression, approximately 2 miles north of the town center, surrounded by a grove of ancient oak trees that predated European settlement. The 7 children who would become central to this mystery were drawn from 5 different families in the community. Emma Richter, age 9, daughter of the town's blacksmith, Heinrich Richter, and his wife Martha. The Möller twins, Klaus and Greta, both age 8, children of farmer Johann Möller. Thomas O'Brien, age 10, son of the town's only Irish Catholic family. Anna Kowalski, age 7, whose Polish father worked as a farm laborer for several local families. And finally, Sarah and Benjamin Walsh, ages 11 and 9 respectively, children of the town's general store proprietor. Contemporary accounts describe these children as typical of their age and circumstances. Emma was noted for her skill with numbers and helped her father keep accounts at the blacksmith shop. The Möller twins were inseparable, known throughout the town for their matching blonde braids and their ability to finish each other's sentences. Thomas was described as a spirited boy with a talent for whistling complicated melodies. Anna, despite her young age, was already helping other families with their household duties, demonstrating the industrious nature expected of children in farming communities. Sarah and Benjamin Walsh were remembered as curious children who spent hours exploring the woods surrounding Millbrook Creek. The events of October 23, 1887, remain shrouded in deliberate secrecy, but several patterns emerge from the surviving testimonies. The children were apparently selected weeks in advance, though no adult seemed willing to explain the selection criteria. Parents spoke vaguely of the old ways and honoring the season, but refused to provide specific details even when pressed by church authorities in later years. What is known comes primarily from the account of Margaret Hoffman, then age 16, who claimed to have followed her younger sister Emma to the ritual site. According to Margaret's testimony, given under oath to the county sheriff in 1895, she witnessed approximately 15 children gathered in the oak grove, arranged in a circle around a natural depression in the earth. Adult supervision was provided by 3 elderly women whom Margaret identified as Gertrude Weber, Helga Möller, and a woman she knew only as the widow Kowalski. Margaret's account describes a ceremony that began with the children joining hands around the depression, while the elderly women chanted in what she believed to be German, though she admitted her knowledge of the language was limited. According to her testimony, the children then took turns placing objects into the depression: small dolls made of corn husks, carved wooden figures, and what appeared to be locks of hair. The ceremony concluded with each child drinking from a wooden cup that was passed around the circle. Margaret claimed that during this final portion of the ritual, a heavy mist rose from the depression, obscuring her view of the proceedings. When the mist cleared, the children and the elderly women had vanished, leaving only the empty grove and an unusual silence that Margaret described as deeper than any quiet I had ever heard. She waited for nearly an hour before returning home, where she found her sister Emma sleeping peacefully in her bed, apparently having been there for hours. The first indications that something had fundamentally changed came gradually. Parents noticed that their children seemed unusually energetic after the harvest season, requiring less sleep and showing remarkable resistance to the common illnesses that typically afflicted youngsters during the winter months. Teachers at the one-room schoolhouse, Sarah Mitchell and later her replacement David Carlson, both noted in their records that the 7 children seemed to require less instruction, as if their capacity for learning had somehow been enhanced. More disturbing changes became apparent as the months passed. Heinrich Richter noted in his journal, portions of which survive in the historical collection, that his daughter Emma showed no signs of the growth spurts typical of children her age. Her clothing, purchased in the fall of 1887, continued to fit perfectly throughout the following year. Similar observations were made by the other parents, though most were reluctant to discuss their concerns openly. The first formal documentation of the phenomenon came from Dr. Edwin Hartford, a traveling physician who maintained a circuit through several rural Iowa communities. Dr. Hartford's medical records, preserved in the collection of the State Medical Society, show detailed measurements and observations of all 7 children taken during his visits to Millbrook Creek in 1888, 1889, and 1891. According to Dr. Hartford's notes, the children's physical development had ceased entirely. Their height, weight, dental development, and even the length of their hair remained consistent across all 3 examinations. Most troubling to Dr. Hartford was the children's response to standard medical tests of the era. Their reflexes were unusually quick, their vision and hearing showed remarkable acuity, and their resistance to fatigue appeared to be exceptional. Dr. Hartford's correspondence with colleagues at the State Medical College in Des Moines reveals his growing concern and professional confusion. In a letter dated March 15, 1891, he wrote, "I have examined these children multiple times over a period of 3 years. By all medical understanding, they should show clear signs of normal development. Instead, they remain precisely as they were when I first encountered them. Their parents insist they are healthy and show no signs of the developmental disorders that might explain such a condition. I'm at a loss to provide a scientific explanation." The children's behavioral changes were equally puzzling. Teachers reported that they demonstrated knowledge of subjects that had not yet been taught, particularly in areas of mathematics and natural science. They showed an unusual affinity for weather prediction, accurately forecasting storms and temperature changes days in advance. Most notably, they began to avoid contact with visitors to the community, seeming to sense the approach of strangers before they came into view. By 1890, the situation had attracted the attention of church authorities. Reverend Samuel Morrison of the Lutheran Church in Fairview conducted what he termed a spiritual investigation of the Millbrook Creek community. His report, filed with the Synod office in Cedar Rapids, describes meetings with the children and their families that left him deeply troubled by the spiritual implications of what I have witnessed, Reverend Morrison's report details his attempts to engage the children in religious instruction and prayer. According to his account, the children participated willingly in church services, but showed what he described as an unnatural detachment from the emotional aspects of worship. They could recite biblical passages with perfect accuracy, but seemed to lack the spiritual engagement typical of children their age. More concerning to Reverend Morrison was the children's response to questions about their future. When asked about their hopes for adulthood, marriage, and families of their own, the children consistently replied that such concerns were not for them. When pressed to explain, they would simply state that they had other purposes, but refused to elaborate further. The investigation took a more official turn in 1892 when Jonas Whitman, a federal census worker, arrived in Millbrook Creek to resolve discrepancies in population records. Whitman's reports to the Bureau of the Census describe what he called administrative irregularities in the documentation of the 7 children. According to Whitman's findings, birth records for several of the children showed evidence of alteration, with original dates apparently erased and new ones written in different handwriting. Church baptismal records displayed similar inconsistencies, with some entries appearing to have been added well after the original registry was completed. Most puzzling were the school enrollment records, which showed the children attending classes appropriate for their apparent age, despite the fact that they should have progressed to higher grades based on their birth dates. Whitman's attempt to resolve these discrepancies through interviews with parents and community leaders met with what he described as coordinated resistance. Parents provided conflicting information about their children's birth dates, often contradicting official records or their own previous statements. Church leaders claimed that various registry books had been damaged or lost, making verification impossible. The census workers' final report, filed in Washington in late 1892, recommended a formal federal investigation of the Millbrook Creek community. However, this recommendation appears to have been buried in bureaucratic channels, as no such investigation was ever conducted. The mystery deepened in 1893 when Dr. Robert Blackwood, a psychiatrist from the State Hospital in Independence, visited Millbrook Creek at the request of concerned relatives of some community members. Dr. Blackwood's clinical notes describe extensive interviews with the 7 children and their families, as well as psychological evaluations designed to assess the children's mental development. Dr. Blackwood's findings were profoundly disturbing. While the children showed intellectual capabilities appropriate for their apparent age, their emotional development displayed what he termed concerning abnormalities. They demonstrated little attachment to their parents or siblings, showing what he described as polite but distant relationships with family members. They expressed no interest in typical childhood activities, such as games, toys, or social interaction with other children their age. Most troubling to Dr. Blackwood was the children's attitude toward time and future planning. In his clinical notes, he wrote, "These children speak of past events as if they occurred yesterday, regardless of when they actually happened. They show no anxiety about future events and seem to have no concept of anticipation or worry. When asked about their plans for tomorrow, next week, or next year, they respond with identical phrases about continuing as they are. This suggests a fundamental disconnection from normal temporal experience." Dr. Blackwood attempted to recommend psychiatric treatment for the children, but his suggestions were firmly rejected by their parents. Community leaders made it clear that outside intervention was not welcome, and Dr. Blackwood was asked to leave Millbrook Creek within days of submitting his initial findings. As the 1890s progressed, the children of the Harvest Circle became increasingly isolated from the broader community. They continued to attend school, but were often seen together as a group, separate from other children. Adults in the community seemed to treat them with a mixture of reverence and unease, often crossing the street to avoid direct contact. The situation reached a crisis point in 1895 when a group of concerned parents from neighboring communities petitioned the county sheriff to investigate what they termed unnatural circumstances in Millbrook Creek. Sheriff William Porter conducted what would become the most thorough official investigation of the phenomenon. Sheriff Porter's report, filed with the county courthouse in Fairview, documents interviews with over 40 residents of Millbrook Creek and surrounding areas. The testimonies reveal a community deeply divided between those who viewed the children as blessed and those who considered them cursed. Several residents reported that the children were occasionally seen walking through the town late at night, moving in single file along the main road before disappearing into the surrounding farmland. More disturbing were reports from farmers who claimed to have encountered the children in their fields during pre-dawn hours. These witnesses described the children as standing motionless among the crops, apparently observing the growth patterns of corn and wheat. When approached, the children would retreat silently into the darkness, moving with what several witnesses described as unnatural coordination. Sheriff Porter's investigation also uncovered evidence of what appeared to be a conspiracy among community leaders to suppress information about the children. During his interviews, he discovered that several key documents, including medical records and school enrollment files, had been destroyed in what officials claimed were accidental fires. Church records showed evidence of systematic alteration, and several longtime residents had apparently been convinced to leave the community under mysterious circumstances. The sheriff's final report concluded that while no evidence of criminal activity could be established, the situation in Millbrook Creek represented a matter of significant concern that warrants continued monitoring. However, like previous official investigations, no further action was taken by county or state authorities. The most haunting accounts from this period come from travelers who passed through Millbrook Creek during the late 1890s. A drummer selling farm equipment reported encountering the 7 children standing beside the main road on a foggy evening in October 1897. According to his account, filed with the local newspaper in Fairview, the children asked him detailed questions about his travels, particularly about other farming communities he had visited. When he asked about their parents, they replied that they were watching the harvest and walked away into the fog. A Methodist circuit preacher, Reverend James Caldwell, provided perhaps the most detailed account of an encounter with the children during this period. In a letter to his bishop, dated November 3, 1898, Reverend Caldwell described meeting the children while seeking shelter during a severe thunderstorm. According to Reverend Caldwell's account, he found refuge in the town's schoolhouse, where he discovered the 7 children sitting in perfect silence, apparently waiting for the storm to pass. When he attempted to engage them in conversation, they responded to his questions with what he described as adult-level knowledge delivered in children's voices. They discussed weather patterns, crop rotation, and soil management with expertise that would have been remarkable in experienced farmers, let alone children. Most disturbing to Reverend Caldwell was the children's response to his attempts at religious discussion. They listened politely to his prayers and biblical quotations, but showed no emotional response to the spiritual content. When he asked about their own religious beliefs, they stated simply that they were bound by older promises and would say nothing more on the subject. The turn of the century brought new attention to the Millbrook Creek situation when Professor William Hartley, a researcher from the State University of Iowa, arrived to conduct what he termed an anthropological study of rural community traditions. Professor Hartley's research, funded by a grant from the Smithsonian Institution, was intended to document disappearing folk customs among immigrant farming communities. Professor Hartley's field notes, preserved in the university archives, describe his growing fascination and concern with the harvest circle tradition and its apparent effects on the 7 children. His interviews with community elders revealed the existence of similar rituals in the old country, though none of his sources would provide specific details about their origins or purposes. According to Professor Hartley's research, the harvest circle represented a fusion of pre-Christian Germanic agricultural rites with elements borrowed from Slavic and Celtic traditions. The ritual was apparently designed to ensure the continued fertility of the land and the prosperity of the community. But Professor Hartley found evidence suggesting that the ceremony had been significantly modified during the early years of the Millbrook Creek settlement. Professor Hartley's attempts to interview the 7 children directly proved unsuccessful, as they consistently deflected his questions and seemed to communicate with each other through subtle gestures and glances that he could not interpret. In his final report, he noted that the children appeared to function as a collective entity rather than as individuals, displaying what he termed unprecedented levels of coordination and shared purpose. The professor's research was cut short in early 1901 when community leaders made it clear that his presence was no longer welcome. His final letters to colleagues describe a growing sense of unease within the community and hints of preparation for some kind of significant event, though he was unable to determine the nature of these preparations. The events of October 1901 would prove to be a turning point in the Millbrook Creek mystery. According to multiple witness accounts, the 7 children disappeared from the community on the night of October 23rd, exactly 14 years after their participation in the original Harvest Circle ritual. They were last seen walking together along the main road, heading north toward the oak grove where the original ceremony had taken place. Search parties organized by concerned parents found no trace of the children in the grove or the surrounding farmland. The natural depression where the ritual had occurred showed signs of recent disturbance, but no footprints or other evidence could be found to indicate what had happened to the missing children. The disappearance might have marked the end of the Millbrook Creek mystery, but reports of sightings began within months of the children's vanishing. A traveling salesman reported encountering 7 children matching their description near the town of Cedar Falls, approximately 60 miles northeast of Millbrook Creek. A farm family near Iowa City claimed to have found the children sleeping in their barn one morning. Though the youngsters had vanished by the time the sheriff arrived, more disturbing were reports from within Millbrook Creek itself. Several residents claimed to have seen the children during the harvest seasons of 1902 and 1903, walking through the community late at night before disappearing into the surrounding fields. These sightings always occurred during the autumn months and were consistently reported by multiple independent witnesses. Dr. Martha Reynolds, a physician who established a practice in Millbrook Creek in 1904, documented several of these reported sightings in her medical journals. According to Dr. Reynolds, the witnesses displayed genuine psychological distress when describing their encounters with the children, showing symptoms consistent with severe shock or trauma. More puzzling was her discovery that several of these witnesses had no previous knowledge of the children's history, having moved to the community after 1901. The most detailed account from this period came from Ernst Weber, son of one of the elderly women who had supervised the original Harvest Circle ceremony. In a sworn statement given to Dr. Reynolds in 1905, Weber described encountering the children in the oak grove during an October evening. According to Weber's account, he had gone to the grove to collect fallen branches for firewood when he discovered the 7 children standing in their familiar circle around the natural depression. They appeared exactly as they had during his childhood, wearing the same clothing and maintaining the same physical appearance. When he called out to them, they turned to look at him with what he described as eyes that held too much knowledge for children to possess. Weber claimed that the children spoke to him, though not with words. According to his statement, they communicated their message directly into his mind, informing him that their purpose was nearly complete and that their time in this world was drawing to an end. They allegedly told him that the land had been protected and would continue to flourish, but that the cost of this protection was now understood by all involved. When Weber attempted to approach the children, they began to fade from view, becoming increasingly transparent until they vanished entirely. The encounter left Weber with severe headaches and disturbing dreams that persisted for months afterward. The final documented sighting of the 7 children occurred in the summer of 1906, when photographer James Mitchell, commissioned by the State Historical Society to document rural Iowa communities, captured what would become the last known image of the group. Mitchell's photograph, taken outside the Millbrook Creek schoolhouse, shows 7 children who match the descriptions of the original participants in the Harvest Circle ceremony. According to Mitchell's notes, he encountered the children during his visit to document the town's architecture and asked them to pose for a photograph. They agreed readily, arranging themselves in a formal line exactly as they had appeared in previous images. Mitchell noted that the children seemed unusually mature for their apparent age and spoke with what he described as old-fashioned formality. The photograph was developed several days after Mitchell's return to Des Moines, and it was only then that he realized the significance of what he had captured. When he attempted to return to Millbrook Creek to learn more about the children, He found that none of the current residents could provide any information about their identities or whereabouts. Mitchell's photograph remains one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in the Millbrook Creek case. Expert analysis conducted in the 1970s confirmed that the image had not been manipulated and that the children in the 1906 photograph were physically identical to those shown in earlier pictures dating back nearly 20 years. By 1910, reports of sightings had ceased entirely, and the 7 children of the Harvest Circle passed into local legend. The oak grove where the original ceremony had taken place was eventually cleared for farmland, and the natural depression was filled in during agricultural improvements in the 1920s. Most of the original families had left Millbrook Creek by this time, seeking opportunities in larger cities or relocating to areas with more fertile soil. The Millbrook Creek community itself began to decline during the early decades of the 20th century. Changes in agricultural practices and the availability of better transportation made smaller farming communities less viable. The schoolhouse closed in 1918, the general store shuttered in 1923, and the last church service was held in 1931. By 1940, fewer than 30 people remained in what had once been a thriving community of 300. The mystery of the 7 children might have been forgotten entirely, if not for the discovery of the archived documents in 1987. The files had been donated to the State Historical Society by the estate of Dr. Martha Reynolds, who had continued to investigate the phenomenon until her death in 1962. Dr. Reynolds had spent nearly 60 years collecting testimonies, documents, and evidence related to the case, though she never published her findings. Dr. Reynolds' private notes, included in the archived collection, reveal her conviction that the Harvest Circle ceremony had somehow removed the 7 children from the normal flow of time. Her theory, based on decades of research into similar phenomena in other cultures, suggested that the ritual had been designed to create guardians for the land, individuals who would exist outside normal human development to protect the agricultural fertility of the region. According to Dr. Reynolds' research, similar traditions existed among various European agricultural communities, though most had been abandoned centuries before immigration to America. The specific combination of rituals and circumstances that occurred in Millbrook Creek appeared to be unique, representing what she termed a successful attempt to create temporal displacement for the purpose of land protection. Modern analysis of the Millbrook Creek agricultural records supports aspects of Dr. Reynolds' theory. Despite poor soil conditions and challenging weather patterns, the farms in the immediate vicinity of the town consistently produced higher crop yields than surrounding areas throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This agricultural success continued even after the community's population decline, with the land remaining unusually fertile until residential development began in the 1960s. Contemporary investigators have attempted to locate descendants of the original families involved in the Harvest Circle ceremony, but these efforts have been largely unsuccessful. Most family lines ended during the early 20th century, either through emigration or the failure to produce offspring. The few surviving relatives who have been contacted declined to discuss their ancestors' involvement in the events at Millbrook Creek. The site of the original community has been extensively developed, with suburban housing covering most of the area where the town once stood. The location of the oak grove has been determined through historical surveys, but no traces of the original trees or the natural depression remain. Soil analysis conducted in the 1990s revealed unusual mineral compositions in the area, though researchers were unable to determine whether these anomalies predated the Harvest Circle ceremony or resulted from it. Archaeological investigations have been limited by the presence of modern construction, but ground-penetrating radar surveys have identified several anomalous features beneath the current landscape. These discoveries include what appears to be a circular stone foundation in the area where the oak grove once stood, though permission for excavation has been denied by current property owners. The psychological impact of the Millbrook Creek case on those who have studied it extensively has been noted by several researchers. Professor Helen Morrison of the University of Iowa, who conducted the most comprehensive analysis of the archived documents during the 1990s, reported experiencing disturbing dreams and an unusual preoccupation with agricultural cycles during her research. Similar effects have been documented among other investigators, leading some to suggest that the phenomenon may have had lasting influences that extend beyond the original participants. The 7 children of the Harvest Circle remain absent from all official records after 1906, with no death certificates, marriage licenses, or other documentation to indicate their ultimate fate. Census records for Iowa and surrounding states show no individuals matching their descriptions or bearing their names in subsequent decades. It is as if they simply ceased to exist in any verifiable form, leaving behind only the testimonies of those who encountered them and the photographs that document their unchanging appearances. The case files remain open in the archives of the Iowa State Historical Society, available to researchers who request access through proper channels. The documents continue to attract attention from historians, anthropologists, and investigators of unexplained phenomena, though none have been able to provide satisfactory explanations for the events that occurred in Millbrook Creek during the late 19th century. Local residents of the area that once encompassed Millbrook Creek occasionally report unusual experiences, particularly during the autumn months. These accounts typically involve sightings of children in old-fashioned clothing walking along rural roads at dusk, though such reports are generally dismissed as the result of suggestion or misidentification. No photographs or other physical evidence have been obtained to support these modern sightings. The harvest traditions that gave rise to the Millbrook Creek phenomenon have been documented in various forms throughout American agricultural communities settled by European immigrants. However, no other instances of similar apparent temporal effects have been reliably documented, suggesting that the specific circumstances that occurred in Iowa during 1887 represented a unique convergence of beliefs, practices, and unknown factors. The question of whether the 7 children of the Harvest Circle achieved the immortality apparently sought through their participation in the ritual remains unanswerable based on available evidence. What is certain is that their story represents one of the most thoroughly documented cases of unexplained phenomena in American historical records, supported by multiple independent sources and physical evidence that defies conventional explanation. The legacy of Millbrook Creek serves as a reminder that the settlement of the American frontier involved not only the establishment of new communities, but also the transplantation of ancient beliefs and practices that had developed over centuries in distant lands. In the isolation of rural Iowa, these traditions found fertile ground in which to take root, and in at least one documented case, to manifest in ways that challenged the fundamental assumptions about the nature of human existence and the passage of time itself. The files in the Iowa State Historical Society archives remain available to any researcher willing to confront the disturbing implications of what they contain. The photographs of 7 unchanging children, the testimonies of dozens of witnesses, and the documented evidence of their apparent removal from normal temporal experience continue to resist explanation more than a century after the events they describe. In the end, the case of the Harvest Circle children stands as a testament to the mysteries that may lie buried in the forgotten corners of American history, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to acknowledge that our understanding of reality may be far more limited than we choose to believe.